Our next report finds Ann Curry in the middle of a confrontation that is quite literally David versus Goliath in, as you might have figured out by now, one of the most remote jungles on Earth. And it turns out we all play a role in this fight, which hits uncomfortably close to home.
Under the soaring expanse of Ecuador's rainforest canopy, the richness of a Garden of Eden, teeming with plants and creatures known, rare, and still undiscovered. But as bountiful as it is above the forest floor, another kind of wealth lies beneath, endangering the wildlife and the way of life for some of the most reclusive people on the planet, some never even seen by the outside world. And because of this, a battle is brewing in this paradise that people here say has everything to do with those of us in the outside world and our way of life. How could that be? To find out, we traveled by water, land, and air deep into the Amazon rainforest, landing in a village called Bamino, to find the rarely seen people of the Waorani tribe.
That's beautiful.
We're met by wary tribal leaders who nevertheless greet us with a gift.
Okay.
The Waorani are more Stone Age than modern age. They are skilled in the ways of survival in the rainforest. Encourage their children to grow up deeply connected to nature so they can understand its creatures, great and small. And above all, honor the ways of their ancestors. It's when we hear this song that we understand why they are so ready to fight. He is singing, "We are not going to lose our culture. We are going to protect our land." The song is about the threat of oil drilling, which they fear will destroy life as they know it. Their fears are not unfounded. The government of Ecuador has just launched a new oil boom, taking bids for drilling rights on up to 8 million more acres of its rainforest, including on some Waorani tribal lands. And that's where our role in this battle comes in. America, for years, has consistently been the #1 oil importer from Ecuador to make plastic and to fuel our cars and heat our homes.
We're definitely guilty in this story. And no matter how remotely removed we are from what's going on here, the U.S. citizens are at least a portion of the problem here.
Few people know more about this rainforest and the people living in it than Boston University biology professor Kelly Swing. More than 20 years ago, he set up a research center in a remote part of the Usuni rainforest, the most biodiverse place in the world.
We have a much greater density of jaguars than has ever been reported. We have pumas, we have ocelots.
And he says about 80% of the wildlife in this rainforest has never even been documented by scientists. As if to prove his point, hiking through the forest, we stumble upon not just any tarantula.
Markings really sets it apart.
It turns out to be a species unknown to science.
We need to make a specimen available so that this species can come to have a scientific name.
But the professor's discoveries have become a race against time, and now he is sounding the alarm.
I'm really starting to have this sense of dread that this place is extremely threatened. And the things that you see up here, you could never see down inside the forest.
To show us what he means, he leads us up a spiraling tower above the forest canopy. We hear the sounds of exotic birds.
Oh my goodness.
But also something else.
What is that noise?
There's definitely an industrial hum coming from the north here.
It's the sound of oil production, which first brings the roads that he says are the greatest threat to the forest. He says they cut like daggers into the landscape. And as evidence, he showed us these before and after photos.
There's this chain reaction that essentially begins with the opening of an access road. As you start to have some commerce, then it just spreads and spreads and spreads until you end up with nothing left.
We travel to the area where those photos were taken, a place the professor believes was once a rainforest even more biodiverse than Usuni. Today, it's an oil town with open gas flares that he says kill massive numbers of insects vital to the food chain. Species have disappeared, but people are most afraid of the crude oil itself. Donald Mancayo became an anti-oil activist after spills and open sludge pits like this one contaminated groundwater and, he says, made people sick. He's part of a massive multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against Texaco, now owned by Chevron, which ended operations in Ecuador some 20 years ago. Chevron says it cleaned up its share of polluted sites, that those sites now pose no significant health risks, and that the Ecuadorian-run oil company assumed responsibility for any remaining contamination. That's small comfort to Moncayo, who takes us on what he calls a toxic tour. He wades into a pit of oil waste and carries back thick sludge.
Smells pretty bad. Okay, let's see how far back it goes.
This pit is more than half the size of a football field, and judging from a branch he plunges into it,
Oh, man, all the way.
it's also at least 6 feet deep. Environmentalists say billions of gallons of oil and toxic waste were left behind by oil companies between 1964 and 1990. In fact, more oil has been spilled in this rainforest than in Alaska's Exxon Valdez disaster. While Rani tribal leader Pentti Baiwa worries about what's to come, he shows us on a map how widespread oil drilling is inside Yasuni. He says it now surrounds his people. His message to the government: let us live in peace and we will be guardians of the forest. We want to leave it with our children. But it may not be that simple. Lenin Moreno is Ecuador's vice president.
If Ecuador were in a position to provide for all of the needs of its people, we will be happy not to exploit. However, that is not the case.
Up to 50% of Ecuador's revenues come from Amazon oil, and the vice president asks how a government can give up revenue that pays for roads, schools, and social programs just to preserve the culture of a small portion of the population. Still, another government official, Ivan Baki, an environmental minister, is not completely in line with Ecuador's oil-centric government.
Why is it that just money is important? What about this human? What about the people? What about
She has seen the human cost of oil drilling firsthand.
the poor people that already many of them have died because of the diseases? And it's very sad.
You acknowledge then that people have died because of pollution?
Of course. And the pits are still not clean as they should. And
Baki is spearheading an unusual effort to save the Yasuni rainforest, though only about 1/12 of it. The offer: Ecuador would not pump out $8 billion worth of oil if the rest of the world donates $4 billion to an environmental trust fund.
Ecuador is a developing country. It could be an example to the world.
About $350 million of the required $4 billion has been pledged. The U.S. has not contributed so far. But the fund won't protect another tribe we visited.
Hola, how are you?
The Quichua. The government has told them to expect oil operations to begin at any time. Like the Waorani, the Quichua believe the spirits of their ancestors live on in the forest. And Quichua women say they will fight alongside their men to protect it. Their tribe of 423 is ready for a last stand. Tribal leader Patricia Hupa, also a shaman healer, says they feel they have no choice.
My grandfather protected this land, and after this my father said me, you need to protect. If I am living, I'm going to fight my community.
As long as you're alive, you're going to
Yes.
fight for your community. You feel so strongly.
Yes. I'm sorry.
He sees no difference between the survival of the forest and the survival of his people. And the government sees no way for the drilling to stop.
So if confronted with indigenous people with spears, would Ecuador use force?
According to international law, if dialogue fails, there is a process of escalation of the use of force.
The Quichua are clearly outmatched in this looming battle. Defeat may be inevitable.
Tengo mi hija.
But Patricia Hupa and these Quichua leaders say they still won't back down.
Árboles.
He says, we have trees, we have forests, we have rivers, and with that strength we will fight. And if we have to, we will die for this. Like the Quichua, the Waorani are reaching out to the world over the internet and sharpening their spears, making poison darts for their blowguns, and waiting. Witnessing it all, Professor Kelly Swing says what is playing out here, unknown to most of the outside world, could forever destroy one of Earth's greatest treasures and the culture of an ancient people.
I definitely see this as a human rights issue. I think it's very sad to say that most human rights issues don't really come to be recognized as human rights issues until people start to die.
Ann Curry's report tonight from one of the most beautiful places on earth, the rainforest in Ecuador.